Hi everyone, so we're now up to lesson 3 level building in terms of my GitHub, but overall I think this is actually the 5th of my video tutorials. So if you are behind, by all means please go to my GitHub, just switch into level 3 and you'll be up to date with my code. In this tutorial we're just going to look at how we can actually build a level, and we'll look at the idea of loading assets prior to the game commencing, because one of the things is your assets will slow down your game, and in that view what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create a global I'm going to create a variable in my game entity to just basically determine if assets have been loaded. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set self.loaded is equal to false. And then what I'm going to do is, and I've moved the audio into my load function. And then in my load function, I'm going to say if not self.loaded. So basically the first time I'm loading my game, I want to load these types of things. And I'm going to load the music only if it hasn't been loaded yet. And that's going to go into my load function. I think I mentioned before the use of invoke. I've done that so that instead of just going straight into the start game, you do have a 2-second delay, so at least the user sees. Let's just say you had no assets at all, you wouldn't see the loading text. So I wanted to put a delay in there for that reason, but what you are going to find is the more assets you put into your game, the longer this loading screen is going to take. In which case I might get rid of that and just call self.startGame. We created in the last lesson, we created a wall. And I'm not going to do this entirely, but if you are going to create these assets or these entities, you can decide whether you want to put those entities and make them accessible to your actual game controller object, in which case I could just use the word self, or whether they're just going to be entities that are going to exist during the game. So for me, I've got this wall and it's going to exist, but I'm never going to actually say to a wall, okay, I want this to explode or something or another. So I've just created it as a standalone entity, and that's added to the scene entities within the Ursina game engine. But what I did want to say is that if you are going to create multiples of that entity, rather than doing it again, we can actually use a keyword duplicate. And so what I'm going to do is for the back wall, I'm actually going to duplicate that wall. And if I know that 128 divided by 8 is equal to 16, and I know that I've put one wall down already, so I put down the first wall in a certain position, so I actually only want to get 15. What I'm going to do is for the next 15 walls, so you're going to go along the back gate or the back fence, all I'm going to do is duplicate that entity. And that's much quicker than actually doing this, calling this line of code over and over again. So all I've got is W is equal to duplicate wall. I'm going to set the X position and I'm going to keep moving it across based on where the wall is. And its Z coordinate is still going to be 64. So if I do that now, I should have a back wall for my world. Your challenge, of course, is see if you can actually create walls to go and surround your entire world, or at least your entire plane, so that the user can't just fall off. So there's a bit of a challenge there. I'll write that in for you. Challenge, fence or perimeter, create a perimeter fence. And for my students at my school, I'd expect you to use loops for that as well. Okay, so I've done that. We're also going to bring in some other entities that could be useful. So to find 3D models, I would highly recommend that you go to a website called Sketchfab. And you'll find that in Sketchfab, you can search for 3D models. Look for ones that are downloadable, and you may want an animated one, but look for things that are downloadable. So if I wanted to put a mushroom in my game, I can find ones that are downloadable. Look for something that's downloadable and hopefully under a free license. If you do use these models and they are downloadable on a free license, make sure that when you actually bring them in, that you keep the license with it. So I've brought in these models here. I don't know why I put a robot model in, but I have. I just brought in these models that I thought could be useful in creating a game. By all means, use my models that I've found. But like I said, make sure you keep the license with them. Actually, I may need to quickly put that license for the magic wolf in. But anyway, I'll do that. So, I have created these ones here. One is an entity, which is a tree. Now, the model itself, I find the models that work best are actually GLTF. While in our player object we used a .egg, I think. That's the format that Ursina likes. Most 3D models don't come in that format, and you would have to export it that way from Blender. So just skip that process. Although Ursina does have a Blender exporter. I just find GLTF models work quite well. So bring that in. Just make sure that you don't lose any textures or your textures aren't too large. I find if your textures are too large in file size, sometimes the GLTF model won't work, and you can actually fix it simply by scaling the texture. So there's an entity there. I found the tree was too large, so I set its scale to 0.5. You can actually, for scale, you can actually scale along 3 coordinates, being its X, Y, and Z axis, or you can just give it a single value, which means it will affect all 3. So that's going to be a tree. I also got the tree itself, by the way, I'm not going to make it collidable. I did that on purpose because I just think it will be too hard. The tree is so kind of, it's not, when you see the tree, you'll understand what I mean. I didn't feel like it needed a collision box. The entity, which is a hut though, I decided that I would create a collision box for it, like so. So I've given it a box collider. And the box collider, look, if you create an entity, a second entity, so before I created the box collider entity, I did actually just create something called hut collide. And then I made it an entity, which was a cube. And I gave the cube exactly the same dimensions as my box collider because I wanted to make it so that it would actually fit my hut. So I've done that. And again, I avoided the mesh collider because it slows things down. Plus my hut actually has a lot of extra things around it. So the mesh collider wasn't exactly the best for it. One of the things I am going to do is I'm going to say then self.loaded is true. So you can see here that in terms of my, and in fact I should be indenting this, in terms of my code, I want to load only the stuff I haven't loaded before. So when I run my game, I'm actually only going to create these things once. And that's why I've said if not self.loaded, but then I've set self.loaded is equal to true. So the game itself knows it's already loaded up all these things. It doesn't need to reload them because loading 3D objects will take time, particularly if the textures are really large in file size. So that there just shows you how you can create a level And there's other various ways that you can create levels. I noticed in some video tutorials, some people have created like little blocks that you can jump up and you can go all the way up into multiple levels that way as well. Look, it's really up to your own imagination what a level looks like. A level could be a maze, or a level could just be a series of objects. I'll leave that up to you to play around with. If you're just creating things that are very simple, like a cube, then all you need to do is use a collider using the default one being box. Likewise, if it was a sphere, you'd use the collider being a sphere. But if you are bringing in a 3D model, it's often easier to create its own collider for it. And as I said in a previous tutorial, if you don't give it a collider, then you'll find that the objects won't be able to detect collisions, including your player first-person controller. Your first-person controller relies upon collisions to determine whether it can run through things or not, or jump on things. So you need to be very careful about giving things colliders. Right, so I'm going to press play now and just see where we're up to. Now, the loading screen itself might take a bit longer. Notice it's no longer just taking 2 seconds anymore. It's now taking like 4 seconds. But you can see now I have a little hut. I have a tree. I have a back wall. And again, the challenge for my school students is to see if they can create a wall all the way around the world. And if you want to move things around, you can. If you want to bring other things, you might want to duplicate the tree and put a few trees in. You could. Because this hut's got a collider, I can't run through it. But the tree has no collider, so I can run straight through. But you can imagine that for the tree, I feel like it would be hard to create a collider for it. So hence I've just got it so you can run straight through. Okay, so that gives you a bit of an insight into loading a level and all the various things you could do. Obviously, in other games, they've created mazes, or they've got different platforms that you can jump on and jump right up into the sky. Somehow I've actually lost my sky texture while I'm at it, so I think I probably just did that maybe just to speed up the frame rate, but I can certainly change that texture back, which will be the last thing I do before I stop this tutorial. So I'm just going to go back and I'm going to change my sky texture back like so. So for those people who are running off my code and you found that your sky disappeared, just go back there, turn on the snow mountains, and it will work. Okay, thank you very much for listening to this tutorial.